Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Tuja Vihari Gopi Jana Balava Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Tuja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Tuja Vihari Jaya Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Sutra Sata His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath Shama Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Ganga Mai Ki Yamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulsi Devi Ki Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Shuktaraj Shri Bhagavatam Ki Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Nita Gaur Premanandi All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya
Narayanam Namaskritya.
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam.
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswati Vyasam.
Stojayamutiraye
Mudiraye.
Nastapareshu Badreshu
Nastaprasha Bhagaveshu.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya.
Bhagavati Uttamashloke
Bhagavati Uttam Shloke.
Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki.
Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremest human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering service unto the pure devotees, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as a irrevocable fact. So, Hare Krishna, guys. Hare Krishna. Get a drink of water really fast. So today, we're continuing Maharaj Prithu's meeting with the four Kumaras. Right now, Sanat Kumar, if I remember correctly, is speaking. And he's giving instructions. And this all goes back, we have to remember this all relates to Prithu Maharaj's question in text 13, where he says that Maharaj Prithu inquired from the sages about persons entangled in this dangerous material existence because of their previous actions. Could such persons, whose only aim is sense gratification, be blessed with any good fortune? So in other words, you got people that are suffering good and bad reactions due to their own material desires. And because they have desires for material enjoyments, Maharaj Prince is like, what hope is there for them? And so everything that we're hearing up until, I believe, text 60 or something, is Sanat Kumar explaining, how one can get out of this situation. So the verse that we're going to be covering today, it should be understood, or it can only really be understood if we remember the previous verse, which is text 23, where Sanat Kumar is saying that one has to make progress in spiritual life by not associating with persons who are simply interested in sense gratification and making money. Not only such persons, but one who associates with such persons should be avoided. So, like they say in Spanish, dime con quien te andes, yo te diré quién eres. Whoever you go with, that's who you become like, or birds of a feather flock together, as we say. One should mold his life in such a way that he cannot live in peace without drinking the nectar of the glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. One can thus be elevated by being disgusted with the taste for sense enjoyment. So, and then today's verse will explain what happens when one, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Forgive me. I was, okay, I'm doing 27, and I thought I had read 26, but anyway. So 27 can only be understood in context with this verse 26. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constantly hearing the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And of course, the previous verses have to be understood. This is kind of like a flow. So it's Krishna, maybe Krishna's arrangement. I reread 24. All right. Okay, so with that said, let's do 27. Dagdashayo mukta samashtatad kuno. Naivatmano bahiranta vichaste. Oh, okay. Naivatmano bahir anantar vichaste.
That line is missing a syllable.
Oh, the line is okay. I thought I was missing. Okay, the line is missing a syllable. Okay. Paratmanur Yadana Purushyats Swapne Yata Purushastadvinaseshe. Dagdashaya Mukta Samasta Tadguno Naidvat Mano Bahir Anantar Vichaste Paratmanor Yad Vadanam Purasyat Swapne Yata Purushastadvinasye Dagyashaya Mukta Samasta Tadguno Daivatmano Bahir Anantar Vichaste Paratmanor Yad Purasyat Swapne Yata Purushastadvinasye. This chant.
Shayamu Kasamasta Guna Naivat Mano Bahiranta Vichaste Arat Manoya Vyavadanam Purashat Swapne Yata Purushastad Vinashe Darshayamu Kasamasta Guna Naivat Mano Bahiranta Vichaste Arat Manoya Vyavadanam Purashat Swapne Yata Purushastad Vinashe Darshayamu Kasamasta Guna Naivat Mano Bahiranta Vichaste Arat Manoya Vyavadanam Purashat Swapne Yata Purushastad Vinashe.
All right, word for word. Dagya Ashaya. All material desires being burned. Mukta, liberated. Samasta, all. Tat gunaha, qualities in connection with matter. Na, not. Eva, certainly. Atmanaha, the soul or the super soul. Bahi, external. Anantaha, internal. Vichaste, acting. Para atmanaho, of the super soul. Yat, that. Vyavadanam, difference. Purushat, It's as it was in the beginning.
as it was in the beginning.
Swapne, in dream.
Dream.
Yata, as. Purushaha, a person. Tat, that. Vinashe, being finished. A person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all when a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends the distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. Please repeat. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends the distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As described by Srila Rupa Goswami, Anyabhilashita Shunyam, one must be devoid of all material desires. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires, there is no longer a need for speculative knowledge or fruitive activities. In that connection, it is to be understood that one is free from the material body. The example is already given above. A coconut, which is dry, is loosened from its outward husk. You guys ever had a coconut like that? You know, like the hard coconut? They eat it in Mexico with chili. This is the stage of liberation. As said in Srimad Bhagavatam, mukti, liberation, means sarupena vyastiti, being situated in one's own constitutional position. All material desires are present as long as one is in the bodily concept of life. But when one realizes that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, his desires are no longer material. A devotee acts in this consciousness. In other words, when material desires in connection with the body are finished, one is actually liberated. When one is liberated from the material qualities, he does not do anything for his personal sense gratification. At that time, all activities performed by him are absolute. In the conditioned state, there are two kinds of activities. One acts on behalf of the body, and at the same time, he acts to become liberated. The devotee, when he is completely freed from all material desires or all material qualities, he transcends the duality of action for the body and soul. Then the bodily concept of life is completely over. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami says, Iha yasya haridasye karmana manasagira nikilaspa avyasta su jivan mukta sa uchite. When one is completely fixed in the transcendental service of the Lord, he is a liberated person in any condition of life. He is called jivan muktaha, liberated even within this body. In such a liberated condition, there is no distinction between actions for sense gratification and actions for liberation. When one is liberated from the desires of sense gratification, he has no longer to suffer the reactions of lamentation or illusion. Actions performed by the karmis and jnanis are subject to lamentation and illusion, but a self-realized person, acting only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, experiences none. This is the stage of oneness, or merging into the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This means that the individual soul, while keeping his individuality, no longer has separate interests. He is fully in the service of the Lord, and he has nothing to do for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, he sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not himself. His personal interest completely perishes. When a person comes out of a dream, the dream vanishes. While dreaming, a person may consider himself a king and see the royal paraphernalia, his soldiers, etc. But when the dream is over, he does not see anything beyond himself. Similarly, a liberated person understands that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, acting in accordance with the desire of the Supreme Lord. And as such, there is no distinction between himself and the Supreme Lord, although both of them retain their individuality. Nityo nitinam chaitanash chaitanam. You quote that verse a lot. This is the perfect conception of oneness in relation to the supersoul and the soul. Om Ganachirandasha Ganachanashakaya Chakshrumintaminata Sashikurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakiramayam Dedati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganaptam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Pradina Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Shah Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhikanta Namustate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripre Pancha Kalpatrubhyasha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, when a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends the distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. So, this verse is actually describing the state of Anyal Bilashita Shunyam. And the previous verse tells us how to get there. So, in the path of spiritual life, often, we want a relationship with God. We want to make spiritual advancement. But at the same time, we have our own interests. Things that we like to do just because we like to do them and they give us some sort of pleasure. I saw this a lot growing up, because sometimes I would go to church on Sunday or whatever. And the austerity would be getting up in the morning for church, although now it would be no austerity. Back then I had to get up at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Now it's so much easier. But, it's all relative, right? So you're like, I don't want to go, but you feel like, okay, I should go because, we're Christians and church is God's house. We have to develop our relationship with God. And then after the church, you go out to eat. You pick a place you like to eat. It's usually a buffet because you have families and you have kids, so you need to get the cheapest price possible. And then after you fill yourself up to the neck with whatever you're eating, which most likely you did not offer to God, you go home. And even the pastor would do this. Like I had a pastor, you go home and you watch something on TV or whatever. Like one of the youth preachers in my church, his daughter would talk about how, yes, on Sunday he was leading the praise and worship. And then he would go home, and there used to be this show, I guess, on Spike TV or whatever, called Trucks. It was like, I guess, building trucks or whatever. And he would sit there and watch that for 4 straight hours. Or sometimes it would be football, American football usually, or whatever. But this is not to criticize anyone in particular. But, even in Krishna consciousness, we have, this is my spiritual life. I'm coming to the temple. I'm doing my seva. But then I go home or whatever. I have a little bit of my own interests, things I like to see, things I like to do. And I'm not necessarily thinking about Krishna in this moment. I'm just doing it because I like to do it. It could be because of, my conditioning, past desires, things like this. And so Srila Prabhupada, he often recommends in the very beginning, because we have certain propensities, that one dovetail their propensities with Krishna, because this helps get us in a consciousness where we're thinking of Krishna more often in our daily lives. When I was preparing for Nectar Devotion, I was having to watch a lot of lectures from Devi Dasi, and because she was the one that she teaches Nectar Devotion in Bhakti Baba, and she's really into helping devotees not have this distinction of, okay, I have my spiritual life and then I have my material thing, but really seeing your whole entire life as a service to Krishna, not thinking this is my family life. Okay, when I go into the temple, that's when I'm being Krishna conscious, or when I'm, doing my Pujari Seva, that's when I'm being Krishna conscious, or when I'm getting up, that's when I'm being Krishna conscious, and then everything else is material. My job is material, this and that. But really, trying to see everything that we do in our life, trying to see Krishna in that, trying to see our activities as service to Krishna. And so in the beginning, as I mentioned just now, Srila Prabhupada would recommend, okay, you have certain propensities, you have things that you like to do, so do them for Krishna. Take what you like to do and dovetail it. In the beginning, when we're teaching people to offer their food, what do we tell them? We tell them, okay, take something that doesn't have meat, fish, or eggs, garlic or onions, and make sure you're clean. And when you're cooking it, just think of Krishna. But often we encourage people, cook what you like. So by doing this, though, they make something, they offer it to Krishna, and it gets their mind in this conscious, okay, thinking for Krishna. In the same way, when somebody is working a job, we'll say, find something you like to do, think of Krishna while you're doing it. And, you can give some of the money that you make from that job to the temple. You can give some of that to print books. Or you can use your skills and what you're good at to help the devotees. And we see this all the time, everybody, I think every Hare Krishna temple loves a maintenance person. Plumber, carpenter, painter, we use all of this. Teacher, lawyer, what architect, whatever it may be. So this is kind of like a more beginning stage. And Prabhupada would very much encourage the devotees, kind of like start off with this, because it's very difficult to just say, okay, I have no separate material desires from Krishna. My desires are only what Krishna wants. Because in the beginning, we don't really know, we haven't really established, our relationship with Krishna yet. We don't know who Krishna is. So we're working under the guidance of the spiritual master, as what was mentioned in the previous verse. So Krishna tells Uddhava in the 11th canto, as it's mentioned here, the distinction between the soul and the super soul. Krishna often explains this, this common analogy of like the two birds in the tree. The super soul, the conditioned soul is eating the fruits of the tree, and the super soul is just sitting there waiting for the bird to stop eating the fruits and look towards him. But this process of taking our desires originally and dovetailing them with Krishna, it helps us kind of turn away from the fruits that we're eating, because as we're doing this, we're developing a relationship with Krishna. Krishna's reciprocating. And naturally, you start to think, okay, I've been serving my desires for so long. What does Krishna want me to do? If you're doing this under the guidance of the spiritual master, of course. So for the pure devotee, they've reached this stage of, okay, whatever Krishna wants me to do, that's what I'll do. Whatever my guru wants me to do, that's what I'll do. And this is what it truly means to be a servant, to not have any separate interests. And also, you got to think about it in a relationship, in a loving relationship, because we can't forget, this thing, we are servants of Krishna, but we're in this loving, sweet relationship with Krishna. So you can think about it even in material life. With a loving relationship, you have a spouse. You can't have your own separate interests or the marriage doesn't really work, does it? If somebody's like, okay, I'm just going to do what I want to do without, consulting you. I'm just going to have my own plans. It tends to cause a lot of conflict. I asked a few people that had been divorced, what was the number one cause of divorce? And they summed it up in one word of selfishness. Each person has their own desires, their own things that they want done. So in the same way, in a relationship with Krishna himself, if we're having, our own desires, to the extent that we're having, this whole thing of like wanting to be independent, wanting to do what we want to do, to that extent, we won't necessarily feel the bliss of Krishna consciousness. So Krishna tells Arjuna in the end of the Bhagavad Gita, abandon everything else you think is going to save you and surrender unto me. But this surrender that we have, it's a process. We're gradually getting to know Krishna. Again, redeveloping our relationship with Krishna, remembering how sweet Krishna is. And that's why so much has been mentioned in these previous purports that we've been reading about two things, about hearing and about chanting. Because by hearing and by chanting, we say this all the time, but this is really how we remember how sweet Krishna is, how much Krishna loves his devotees, and how much Krishna actually loves us. Because you can't really surrender to someone. You can't really give up your own separate desires unless you actually love them and you know that they love you. This is why, there's the perverted reflection of this in the beginning of a relationship when two people fall in love. And then it's like, you start to think, okay, I don't care as long as I'm with you and as long as you're happy. You see that in the very beginning. But because it's not pure, what happens? Our own selfish desires start to creep in. So with the devotees of the Lord, they actually have this eternally with Krishna. This feeling is there eternally of just happiness, seeing Krishna happy. And at the same time, it's not just one-sided. Because one-sidedness, we learn in a Nectar devotion that actually a one-sided relationship is rasabhas. So Krishna, he actually is reciprocating with the devotee, and he wants to see the devotee happy as well. So how do we get there? How do we get to this state of, okay, I want to not have my own interest. I just want Krishna to be happy. And I want to do what Krishna wants me to do. I want to do what Guru wants me to do. So as I just said previously, this Bhagavatam talks about the process of hearing and chanting. But also, we have so many pastimes in this Bhagavatam that show us the power, the potency of just starting this practice of devotional service. We see in the 8th canto the story with Gajendra. Gajendra, who was he in his previous life? King Indradumna. King Indradumna.
He was the king Indra.
King Indradumna, yeah. And somehow or other, he had to take birth as an elephant.
Same king.
I've been told it is. I've been told this. But, whatever we learn in devotional service, Krishna says that stays with you. Because Arjuna had this doubt. And the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he tells Krishna, Krishna, what happens if one doesn't complete, this spiritual process, but at the same time, he's given up material life? And certain people, when they come to Krishna consciousness, they might have this doubt. What if I don't perfect myself spiritually? But I gave up college. I gave up my job. I gave up all this, I'm just going to be like nothing. That's the definition of a total loser. And Krishna says, you don't have to worry. Just a little bit of practice. He talks about the yogi that's been practicing for a little bit of time. They ultimately, what happens to the yogi that's been practicing for a short amount of time? Does anyone remember?
Takes birth from family of rich aristocracy.
Yeah. And what about the yogi that's been practicing for a long amount of time?
Takes birth from family. Great transcendentalists who are very rich in knowledge.
And then what's the verse after this?
However, that's good. That's what
Close. Krishna then explains, and then very soon he takes again to this process of devotional service. Why? Because it's in the mind. So you'll see sometimes people will come to the temple and they'll take up Krishna consciousness very quickly. Other people, it might take them years to start chanting 16 rounds, because it all depends on where you are in this process. You'll see some kids born in devotee families. They'll naturally become great devotees. Some kids, they're like, I need to go dabble in the material world. Because everybody's kind of like at a different stage. And you have to ultimately, reach the point that I was talking about in a few verses ago of kind of having disgust with this material enjoyment. And not everybody's there yet. But anyway, getting back to King Indradyumna, or now as Gajendra, as I was mentioning, he remembered this prayer from a previous lifetime. When he was out and he was having a good time, he wasn't thinking at the moment of this prayer. But when he got into the water and he got bit by the crocodile. And at first, what does he start to do? He starts to fight the crocodile. That's how it is in material life. We have some setback and we try to make some material adjustment. But Prabhupada would explain that this crocodile was in his environment. Because crocodiles, they like water. I've been in Florida. I've seen crocodiles, alligators. They very much like to be in these swampy areas. That's why you don't want to walk your dog near there. You might lose it. And so anyway, of course, Gajendra wasn't from Florida, so he went into this water and he got bit by the crocodile. And the crocodile's trying to fight him, and Gajendra's trying to wrestle with this crocodile. But Gajendra is out of his elements, because elephants are made for land. They're not made for water. So even though Gajendra was stronger than this crocodile, the crocodile started to get the upper hand because he was in the environment. And Gajendra was out of his environment, so Gajendra started to get weaker. And so in the same way, we as conditioned souls, we're out of our environments. We're out of our natural environment. We're spiritual beings, but we're in the material world. But who's in the material energy? This is the environment, the material energy. This is why we get overwhelmed. So therefore, but this process of devotional service is so strong that even if just a little bit of it helps us. So in the same way with Gajendra, we see that in this moment he remembered these prayers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he was praying these prayers to Lord Vishnu. And actually, these are beautiful prayers. I'm sure you've all read them, right? The prayers of Gajendra. Very, very beautiful. Yeah, I used to say them every day. And because of that, Vishnu came down. He saved Gajendra and he liberated the crocodile. Because the crocodile was actually I think a Gandharva or something in his previous birth. I haven't read this past time in about a year, but if I remember correctly, he had a nice backstory. So the point that I'm getting at is that this process of hearing and chanting is so powerful that even, if we have our own separate desires, that this will act. It's like a medicine. You don't need to know how the medicine acts. You just take it and it works. In the same way, when we eat, we don't think, how is my body digesting this food? It just digests it. And I'm not just speaking about this theoretically, because this is what it says in Shastra, but we can see practical examples of this in material life. I believe I mentioned this story, and I can't remember if I mentioned it to you guys, where I mentioned it in my last class, because I also gave a Bhagavatam class yesterday on Zoom in the evening. But there was this guy once, he grew up chanting Hare Krishna. And later, he got involved in drugs. Kind of like, Hajime took the sinful life. And he was living in a trailer. And he was living with a few drug addicts in this trailer somewhere. And this guy came in to make a drug deal. So he came in with a gun. He was going to trade the gun for the drugs. And when he came in, the guy's sitting down, and they're all sitting at the table, and they're negotiating. And the guy asked him, okay, does the gun work? He said, yeah, the gun works. And said, okay, I'll give you this much of, I guess it was heroin or whatever for the gun. And right as they're about to make the drug deal, there's 4 people in this room. The guy pulls out the gun and starts to shoot 2 of the people. And the guy that's telling this story, the one that grew up chanting Hare Krishna, he immediately runs under the table because he's scared to death. And he sees, first of all, he just sees his friend get shot in the face. And he said it was the most horrific sight. Literally just watching somebody, die like that. It was gone, bleed out, done. And then he runs out from under the table, runs back to his room to tell his other friend, this guy's got a gun, we got to get out of here. And the guy comes in and shoots his friend in the face and then shoots him in the chest. And he said, I was lying there realizing what had happened. Drug deal gone bad. Classic story of what happens when people get involved in things like this. The guy took the drugs and ran off, and the gun. And he said, I was lying there thinking, oh my God, this is how my life is going to end. It's over for me. Because the other 3 people were already dead. And he was waiting there to die. And he said, at this moment, I remembered a mantra my father had taught me, and I started to chant this Hare Krishna. And even though, I wasn't a devotee, I had lived so much of like a sinful life. I had done so many horrible things. I just started to focus on this mantra, thinking, this is it, I'm about to go. And my dad always told me if I was ever in trouble to chant this mantra. So I started to chant this mantra. And I think he lost consciousness, but he was the only one that survived. And then when he got out of the hospital, then that's when he decided, okay, I'm going to clean up my life. And that inspired him to take to a life of devotional service. But this just really shows, this doesn't just happen with Gajendra that, he remembers some prayer from his previous life. But even, we can see just, teaching somebody this mantra, we never know, when they might remember it, when they might call out to Krishna, when it might happen. So we can see that it happened with this person, very similar to Ajamel. Once he got better, he gave up his sinful activities and became a devotee from that very horrible condition. So I'm bringing this up because it goes along with, I was saying, what we're putting in our mind, that sticks. The mind is like glue, so we're putting in there, it sticks. So when we're putting Krishna in there, and we're dovetailing, whatever propensities we have at this stage, because we're in the stage of sadhana bhakti, we're dovetailing that with Krishna. That helps us get to the point that's what's talking about here, where we ultimately don't have separate desires. Because what happens is you start to fall in love with Krishna. Just like when you fall in love with a person, you want to see them happy, and your happiness is their happiness. But with Krishna, this is spiritual, this is eternal. So this is ultimately how the process happens. And then we reach this point, like Prabhupada is mentioning here, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. Meaning that, we have in a dream, we see so many things. But when we wake up, we only see ourselves. But for the devotee, they don't see, okay, now I'm serving Krishna, now I'm doing my own thing. They see it all as, I am just serving Krishna. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's a great example. Because even though he was this householder, he had this bhajan, this beautiful song to Krishna where he said, whatever I own, home, children, wife, I serve them as a service to you because they're your part and parcel. So seeing the wife or the husband or the children, they are very dear to Krishna. They are part and parcel to Krishna. I am doing my duty of taking care of them because they are Krishna's, not because they are mine. And this house I am taking care of because it is Krishna's, not because it is mine. And so we see the devotee starts to see everything like this. Even Prabhupada said when he would get money out, he would handle the money very carefully, even if it was a coin or whatever, because he would see it as Krishna's energy. Prabhupada had a perfect example of this. So with that said, we'll stop here for discussion. Vancha kapa tribisha kripa sindhibe vichapati pabnibyo vaishnavyo namo namaha. Are there any thoughts, questions, comments, appreciations about this purport that anybody would like to share?
Kind of like two things. One is this fantastic class. Three things, because that was one. But anyways, most fantastic class. Thank you. But it's kind of like, it could get a little confusing there without the purport where it says, at the time, the difference between the soul and the super soul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. That can be confusing and can kind of seemingly sound a little like the Mayavad or the impersonalist philosophy, but Prabhupada gives a nice explanation on it, which is good. And then I was going to say that about falling in love with Krishna and doing bhakti. That Krishna says, I was just having this realization since Guru Maharaj's class on Saturday, and realization that Krishna, he says there are four types of pious people who surrender unto me, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of them is the jnanis, or he who is seeking knowledge of the absolute truth, and Krishna glorifies that person as being situated in pure knowledge of him and engaging in devotional service, yet still not the level of like a pure ragatmika bhakta.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still like a jnani, and I was thinking, what does it mean to have that? How do you go beyond that point of being a jnani, really? Because it kind of made me realize that I'm a jnani, and so many devotees that we go through the different kind of stages. We all kind of surrender to Krishna because we're distressed. We surrender to Krishna because we're inquisitive, and all the different reasons are there. But to actually fully surrender to Krishna means that you give up even the desire for, sorry for we're talking about this, even the desire for spiritual knowledge, even the desire for, all of our desires to have like some type of spiritual attainment kind of cease in the presence of pure bhakti.
Yeah.
Because we think, I want spiritual advancement, and you're thinking about making advancement and all these things. But when one just simply gives their heart to Krishna, then that's it. Like Madhavendra Puri says that prayer, right? He's talking to like all the religion. He's like, my dear religion, my dear regulative principles, I'm sorry I can't deal with you right now because I'm too absorbed in, this boy from Vrindavan. So
Yeah, that's like, it's really good to remember the ultimate goal like that. Because even if we're not there, if you don't know where you're going, then you can get kind of lost along the way. You're just going aimless. Like saying shoot for the moon, And if you miss, you land among the stars. But you have to know where the moon is to shoot for it. What you're saying, about we have to ultimately give up all material and spiritual desires. It reminded me of what I read in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This one devotee, I can't remember the name, but he took initiation, but he took sannyas or something, but he cut off his shika, and he just dressed very very kind of very simply. He's basically getting rid of all sense of designations and strict dominar. And it reminded me that originally I heard that when the Brahmanas, the people that were in the Brahmana Varna, when they would renounce, it used to be that they would actually take off their Brahman thread because they were at a stage of life where they were trying to give up, even the distinction of being a Brahmana, just wanting to be servant to Krishna. And so I remember, when I was in Atlanta, some of the brahmacharis, when they took initiation, I would go to them and say congratulations and give them dakshi. And then they would respond and they would say, Mataji, please bless me that I can stay brahmachari. But what you're discussing, about we have to give up like material and spiritual desires. The whole idea is just to serve Krishna. I'm thinking, do you want to stay brahmachari or do you want to develop pure love of Krishna? Because you never know. You never know. I mean, you could be in a situation where a certain ashram might be an impediment to that. You never know the situation in the material world.
That's a big impediment. That whole world there is a big impediment. The only, and it's my experience, that the only way to like, and everybody I've seen that's a really successful renunciate, they're not thinking like, oh, they're just absorbed.
So yeah, no, that was very eye-opening for me. This whole idea of, we had to give up even spiritual desires, pure bhakti. So. Yes, Shanta.
Thank you so much. Very beautiful class. I really appreciate, you bring all the shastras and practical life all together. I like the way you say, like, just chant Hare Krishna and you don't have to know why the medicine works. Because you just take it, it is working out automatically. And really nice point. And in this hard situation, always Krishna helps us. And I feel that realization sometimes is Krishna giving us trouble to get a connection more, because when we have a problem, we go deeply prayer to Krishna. The other things, I really like it. You connect with a family life also. That's how I feel sometimes. Children, somebody serving for family, and please to Krishna, because our desire to make a devotee. And thank you so much for bringing the chapter.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So you're talking about how people, they kind of keep their devotional life separate, other parts of their life, and how really we should kind of make our life in such a way so that the whole thing is devotional. And it just reminded me of like growing up, I would hear people talk in a very deriding tone about Jesus freaks, right? You remember hearing that, and I remember like, people were so kind of hateful towards people they designated as Jesus freaks. But I remember thinking, even as a kid, like, well, I mean, if they're worshiping God, like, shouldn't you be a freak about that? If you really truly believe in God, I mean, isn't that the one thing that you should really like dedicate every aspect of your life to? And so I think, that's one thing that's really nice about Krishna consciousness is if you follow the process, I mean, your life naturally becomes that way. I was just reflecting yesterday. I was out and about in the world, and I was, driving past like a nice bush with all these flowers on it, and immediately I was just thinking, like, oh, it'd be so nice to go get some of those flowers for my deities, and without the process that Srila Prabhupada set down for us, like, I wouldn't be thinking of Krishna at that time when I saw that bush, but I was, because I take part in deity worship. So anyway.
Yeah, I don't think I even cared about flowers too much before I Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I appreciate that. And also, along with your point about the Jesus freaks, it was reminding me, what I saw kind of growing up in the church. You had some people that were, really into it. Some young people that were really following their values and following the teachings. And then some people that were kind of going because maybe they wanted to socialize. They were interested in Jesus, of course, but they had separate interests, like what this verse is talking about here. And I noticed, since I've reconnected. I've seen some of them on social media and stuff. The ones that were quote unquote Jesus freaks or whatever, they actually ended up with better, more peaceful lives than the people that did it, you know, I mean, materially and spiritually speaking. So, yeah.
We have a separate interest thing, you know, it's like I told you, you know, yesterday, you know, you just like, if you deviate a little bit, you know, I was like, because I was at my mom's and I said the TV was going and I just like was curious about this thing. So I looked at like 10 minutes of a TV show and just like, I felt like my consciousness just like literally went to the lowest depths of it, just like, it's like 10 minutes, you know? So it's like, we just can't, like, devotional service is so precious and it's so, you know, it's so subtle that, you know, like it's something you really work at and chisel away at every single day to get. And then, you know, even a little distraction, you know, you step out, you know, like you have a day, like I'll start, you know, 2:00 and then do sadhana all day and then, you know, read and, you know, then it's like, okay, now I'm going to look at my messages on Facebook, you know, and then just something like that can, you know, you get a little bit off for 5 seconds and it's like, you miss it, you know, you miss that state. So it's so subtle. You just got to really absorb yourself systematically, cut out each distraction. It takes, I mean, I guess for me, it's taken years, you know, to get more and more. So
It takes years. And then sometimes, you know, the world is fixed up in such a way that even without endeavoring, the distractions come. So you kind of just got to also try to see connect that to Krishna. I want to disturb your mind.
well, there's a difference between, you know, like distractions coming in and you go and see.
Yeah, true. Like I remember my mom, you know, like she was watching like 90 Day Fiance or whatever because like she wants to put me on that reality show because I'm a gay shit guy from another country, and we laugh or like the hell about it. But anyway, I like watched I think a few minutes of this show like when I was with her, and I could just feel like the tamagumi because they edit. The people don't realize, even though they don't follow scripts, they like the producers will fix a situation. Like they'll set up a situation that will cause drama between the people. And so cause fighting. So there's a lot of fighting. You'll notice in every episode there's a huge fight. Nobody's ever peaceful. And you can feel that tamagun, like just start to like get into your like consciousness to where like you might start to feel aggravated with people for no reason. Like it really rubs off on you. So you gotta be careful, you know.
People watch Jerry Springer and wonder why they have relationship issues.
I know. God, my dad used to watch that show. No wonder he's divorced. Okay. Going through Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
It's like two of the worst shows, Jerry Springer, 90 Days.